Hello there. My name is Aaron Gilmartin, and I'm a guide here at Monterey State Historic Park. We are a state park in Monterey, California that consists of many historic buildings from the 1800s. And I'm really excited to share one of those buildings with you today. I'm here in front of the Robert Louis Stevenson House. Now, Robert Louis Stevenson, you may have heard the name before. He was a very famous author. Wrote books like Treasure Island and The Strange Case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. But we're going to talk about a period in his life before all that. He was here in Monterey as a young man for a relatively short period of time, but his time here would help make him into the man that the world would come to know and love. At the time he was staying here, this building was known as the French Hotel. It was a boarding house. Today, it's one of the only buildings remaining that has a direct tie to his time here in Monterey. Now, the French Hotel was kind of run down, like the rest of Monterey during this period. Monterey used to be the capital city, but after the gold rush, all that changed. Many people left and the capital moved, and the town was sort of forgotten for a little while. So at the time where Stevenson is staying here, Monterey is just this sleepy little artist community and fishing village. Now, why had Stevenson come to Monterey, all the way from his native Scotland? Well, you see, he came for love. So let's go on inside and hear the rest of the story. So welcome inside. I would like to introduce you to Fanny Osborne. This is the woman that Stevenson traveled all the way to Monterey to meet. He took a steamship across the Atlantic Ocean from Europe, and then a 2-week train ride from New York to Monterey. Now, he had met Fanny a few years prior in France, and he had fallen in love. Now, he was very much in love with her, but his family and friends, they had some reservations. For one, she was an American. He was Scottish. She was 10 years older than he was. She was married, and she had 2 children. Her daughter was only 10 years younger than Stevenson. So this was really, not traditional and not really favorably looked upon by the people in Stevenson's circle. But he had heard word that she was going to divorce her husband. And so without his friends' moral support and without his family's monetary support, he risks it all and he makes the journey. And he gets here to Monterey expecting that they will finally be together. But Fanny is kind of caught off guard. She was not really expecting him to show up. When he got here, he was so sick from his journey, he could barely stand. And she had started to make amends with her husband, Samuel. So she leaves Monterey, going back to the Bay Area, where she lived with her husband. And Stevenson was just kind of left to hang out here, not sure what his future would hold. But he didn't sit idly. He made a lot of friends, he got to know the new community here, and most importantly, he was writing. I'd mentioned before that Stevenson had not yet published the novels that would make him famous at the time that he was here in Monterey, but he was still very much a writer. His whole life he had been fascinated with stories. As a young man, he had written travel columns, newspaper articles for magazines, a lot of essays, and a lot of letters. And while he's here in Monterey, he's doing the same thing. He's writing letters to his friends and contacts back in Europe. He is writing about his journey to Monterey. He starts working on An Amateur Immigrant. He is working on the Old Pacific Capital, which is about his time here in Monterey. And he begins working on a novel that you've probably never heard of, A Vendetta in the West by Robert Louis Stevenson. This was an unfinished, unpublished novel, but it was a Western set here in Monterey. He had written at least 100 pages before giving up on the project. So even though he was not yet a published novelist, he begins working on these bigger projects. And only a few short years later, he would publish Treasure Island and become famous around the world. We're out here in the garden, which at the time of Stevenson staying in this building, this would have just kind of been an open yard. At that time, this was actually the front of the building. The building's orientation has changed over time, so this was almost like the front yard, and this gave access to the neighborhood around here. Now, this was the French Hotel when Stevenson was staying here, and there were a lot of other French residents in this part of Monterey. And Stevenson befriended many of them. Just a very short distance away, where our bus station is now, was Jules Simonneau's restaurant. And that restaurant was a hub for Monterey's bohemian community. French artists, fishermen, people that Stevenson swapped stories with. And he made a lot of friendships that would last the rest of his life. Jules Simonneau was probably the best friendship to come out of his time here in Monterey. Simonneau helped him when he was sick. He helped him find lodging here at the French Hotel, and he would give Stevenson free meals at his restaurant. Now, this connection led to Simonneau talking about this building and Stevenson's story long after Stevenson had left, and even long after Stevenson had died. So very quickly, this building became known as the Stevenson House. Jules Simonneau would take people from his restaurant and walk them over here. It was a very short distance, and he would point out the window where he claimed that Stevenson stayed, and he would tell the stories of his friendship with this now famous author. And until Stevenson's death, he sent Jules Simonneau a copy of every single book he published. Even though he never returned to Monterey, these two men were lifelong friends. And those relationships that Stevenson made while he was here really helped shape him and give him his confidence and the resources to do what he did for the rest of his career. Stevenson's time in Monterey came to an end in late December of 1879. He had finally heard from Fanny. She was going to divorce her husband and wanted him to join her up in San Francisco. So he leaves Monterey never to return and begins the next chapter in his life. He marries Fanny in May of 1880, and from there they travel around California and all the way around the South Pacific. And the latter part of his life would really focus on his journeys through the Pacific Islands, even meeting the King of Hawaii, and eventually settling in Samoa, all while he is publishing the stories that we know and love today. Treasure Island, his first big success, was written in part as a story for Fanny's young son, Lloyd. Because of that family connection, because he was able to wait here in Monterey and marry Fanny, he got the inspiration for the stories and for the people that would be able to define his career. Now, his career, relatively short because Stevenson actually dies young. He's only 44 years old. He passes away in 1894. But he wrote about a dozen novels, countless letters and essays and newspaper articles and magazine articles, poems, prayers, even music. And today we have this amazing collection of his works that we can enjoy. And here in the Robert Louis Stevenson House, we have an amazing collection that tells the legacy of his life. His family understood the importance of his time here in Monterey, waiting for Fanny, waiting for his life to begin. And they donated many of these pieces to be displayed in a museum in his honor, a museum that we continue to operate to this day. So thank you for joining me on this tour, and thanks for watching.